this is something that I love to show. I've shown it far too many times probably in many different settings. I don't think it really matters what what you're talking about. It's really just to give us some clarity and perspective. Often when we're talking about stuff, we are talking about perspective. And I remember as a kid, actually a kid, I was in high school and I had a lot of ideas and a lot of passions and things like that. And sometimes I would try to relay these ideas to my mom, and my mom would, she often didn't agree, or she didn't understand, or it didn't work out, whatever. And I would get so frustrated because she wasn't getting it and all this sort of thing. And she kept showing me, she would show me a book. All right, and she could see the front of the book, and I could see the back of the book, and she's like, "What do you see?" And we're staring at the book, but you see something very different than what I see. That sort of thing. So it's really something that I've held on to through my paths, and it's really about perspective. So whatever you might imagine this thing is,
Joanna was right.
That's what you guessed, right?
I didn't know the word, but I like the thing at the top of it. She was kind of gestures that have that crazy thing in their head.
So it's all about perspective, right? And what you think today in this moment your reality is, which is great, and expressing it in however you express it is great. Just always keep in mind that it's part of something else, and no matter what you do, it's part of something bigger. It's part of something else. And we know from science that this is infinite, right? So now we're that rooster we can't even see anymore, but we recognize that it's somewhere beyond that window on that farm, and that farm might just be part of somebody's toy set at home. And we can again zoom out. Well, it was just part of a book some boy was reading as he was hanging out poolside on a ship, which was on the side of the bus, right? It's just, they go pretty far into this. But for me, it's always I've always found it extremely helpful to remember. This is a stamp. It's not anything less than a stamp, right? It is, in all of its glory, a full-fledged stamp. It's a stamp on an envelope. And that envelope, right, so on and so forth. Just keeping that context, keeping that perspective and it helps me keep an open mind, because no matter what I think my reality is, that's great. It's never out of context. It's never an island in its own kind of universe. It's always connected to something else, somewhere else. Right, so as I zoom out, of course, just kind of quickly finish this off. Of course, it ends up outside of the Earth, which is always cool to me. Now we're at this planet, right? And this is really where we're at today. I guess this is a nice segue into that. It's called Zoom. I didn't make that up. It's a very old book, though.
And this is one of the things where it becomes important that something like this in the world of big data right now, which is we're at this, as Peter was talking about earlier, this Goldilocks moment in our time where the control has been taken away from the individuals, the governments, etc., that have controlled it, and it's a free-for-all of this narrative now. Whoever can get a hold of that big data, that chaos that's out there, and now form something with it, right, and create order from the chaos, is going to be able to create the reality, or create the reality that we want. And so this is an example of when you look at that data and you keep coming out, it just form,
Mm-hmm.
and it just goes on infinitum. Okay, go ahead, Peter.
Okay. Okay, so like I said, I'm going to do this fairly quickly. I'm not expecting you folks to absorb any more than just the basics of this. I do this partly for me because this helps me with my structure, but this actually is a process. So I want you to see that while I'm talking through all sorts of stuff, it's all connected. There is a procedure and it's systematic, and it's pretty darn cool, and it's definitely, there's room for improvement and refinement through the way, but this is what we're going to use I was talking to you before about like being a futurist and that sort of thing. It's this type of thing that I believe we can use to actually help transition and evolve humanity in cool ways. But time will tell. So who are we? We're Divergent Unity. We're considering ourselves a think tank. And traditionally, are you okay over there? Traditionally, when we a think tank is just simply asking some of these large questions and putting some serious, systematic, scientific energy into trying to solve some of these, or answer some of these questions, solve some of these issues. So a traditional think tank would be something we're trying to solve economic issues globally, and so there'll be a lot of contracts. So a company would come in or an institution would come in and say, we're wrestling with this. We're trying to figure out what approach or what steps we might take or strategies to solve this certain thing. Think tankers would come in and they would discuss. They would bring in experts from different fields and so on and so forth to try to kind of come up with the answer. So in that traditional sense, we're considering what Divergent Unity is at that top level is a think tank.
In that global level, it gives us the, I don't want to say authority, it gives us the leeway, because think tanks, you can pose any questions to.
Yeah.
It's not all of a sudden craziness, we're a think tank.
It's a brainstorm, yeah.
It's a brain, right?
Yeah.
So, and corporations use these all the time, among other things.
Yeah, get out of the
Right,
box.
to how do we, exactly, right? So, or how to control within the box, right?
Right.
So that thing, because we kept looking for this idea that just allows us to, stop the conversation. We're a think tank. Okay, so now we can pose any question.
Yeah.
Right?
So in this way, we're a think tank, but we're a specialized one, and that's again kind of the point of a think tank. We like to say we're a humanitarian think tank. So we're dealing with those large issues on a humanitarian scale. So, but really what we like to do is we like to focus on exploring, and we're just saying species evolution. And I mean, that sounds like a mouthful, but we're exploring what it means to be moving ahead. We're moving ahead at such a rate. And I'll just give you, we've broken it down into 6 nice solid categories. I mean, there are more, but 6 categories of where we can point the finger and say, wow, that is a massive step forward, and we're about to hit it, or we already have hit it. So, for example, automation. Do you know what I mean when I say automation?
Robotics?
Uh-huh, yep.
Yeah.
That's what we are.
Yeah, I mean,
Replacing people out of jobs.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
so technology is just flying at just breakneck speeds. Automation is a reality. It's hitting us currently. Fast forward 5 years from now, just 5 years. I don't know what it looks like. We don't really know what it looks like, but it's something we have to put at the forefront of what's actually happening, because after automation happens, it all changes.
Mm-hmm. And as technologists, we can tell you that they don't fully understand what they're getting into.
Well, yeah, so, yeah.
With DNA splicing and creating.
Hold on, don't get ahead of me here.
Yeah, sure. So that's why I was talking.
You're a self-contained think tank. That's what- Quantum. Does anyone know what this means? And it's okay if you don't.
It means binary was 1 and 0. Quantum is all the things in between 1 and 0.
1 and 0.
Yeah.
Yep. I mean, it's another one of these major, we'll call it a milestone. I don't know. It's going to hit us hard, and it's going to change everything. So, okay, so quantum is one of those, just in one of those categories, another one of those things that's happening now, and in the next, we'll say 1 to 5 years, it's going to change everything. Another one, big one, space travel. So, there's been a lot of talk about going to Mars. There's been a lot of talk about, there's been a lot of billions of dollars spent even in the last 2 years alone on trying to, Mr. Elon Musk there, trying to get his his rockets to land properly on these relatively small ocean-bound vessels, flatbeds, so that they can take off and land with the same rocket. Things like that. So space travel, next 1 to 5 years. I mean, there's a lot of outlooks in the next 30 years with space travel, because I think it's going to take a lot of money to build stuff to get that. But it's one of those items that is now upon us. We might want to look at this as, this is the sort of issue that our children, or at least I shouldn't say our children, this generation that's growing up is going to have to know what to do with, going to learn how to deal with it in whatever ways makes sense. And of course, I thought there were 6. Oh, I missed one. AI, artificial intelligence. Okay, that's already here. It's already everywhere. It's already changing the entire field. Whether we know it or not, AI it's got a stronghold in so many different ways, for the better or for the good and for the bad and everything in between.
And for the most part, it's children playing the gasoline. They don't understand.
Yeah. And of course, I've got 2 more here. I'm going to put them out here. So one is cyborg. Do you know what I mean when I say cyborg? There's this movement called transhumanism, and it's growing in its steam. And it's this idea that we can evolve our species through upgrades, through external upgrades. So that's the key that's the key distinction. Yeah. So whether it's like getting that mobile device that we can now transplant or like have a mind meld with in here, or there's an implant that allows us to have GPS, or there's medical, there's tons and tons of categories to that cyborg thing. But it is
basically anyone who's been a role player and played in cyberpunk genre could probably get an idea.
Yeah, neuromancer, right?
Like the Matrix is all about that. It's augmented into the machine.
Yeah. And here's one here that often stays in the realm of business, and so I say not a lot, but often when I talk to people who aren't into this sort of concept, that's really something they don't know a lot about, if ever, even hearing about it. It's this idea of big data. So yeah, exactly. So big data it's not a sleeping giant. It is the thing that powers all of this. Big data. So it's every time you go to your Facebook and you scroll and you click, or some other social media outlet, or YouTube, or web browsing in general.
Buy something online.
Or if you have a cell phone, you are contributing to the library of big data. It's growing at astronomical rates. What was in 3 years? No, 72 days.
In 72 days, yeah. It will be, was it triple? Yeah, I have to get the exact number again. The doubling effect of scientific research doubles every 3 years.
So now that everybody's connected and jacked into the internet in all these different ways, companies and these big, massive organizations, Google, Facebook, Microsoft, all the big guys, are taking all of our behavior and digitizing it, putting it into a bunch of ones and zeros and data points. So it's probably a better explanation for big data, but that's basically what it is. It's that infrastructure that is driving what we're about to hit.
Incidentally, Donald Trump just signed an executive order that allows for you know what net neutrality is, right? Have you heard about that? Net neutrality. This is where service providers are supposed to be indiscriminate as to who's allowed to use their service. So if you have a small startup company, it can't be crushed right out the gate by someone who's donating a lot of money to a service provider to have access to them. Now, what's happening is that that's going to probably go away, which means that it's in combination with the fact that if you have any of your data going through the United States territorial borders, then it's subject to these regulations, which means that if you search for a certain thing, your search history could then be sold to a third party so that they can do whatever they want with it.
Yeah.
And of course, advertisers are going to be interested. The thing I always crack up about is, when I think about big data, is the number of porn searches that are out there. And how that must be contributing to some wild AI thinking we are all sex-obsessed primates, you know? That's a lot of the traffic right there.
Yeah. Well, the world's top, 4 of the world's top 10 websites visited, I think, are porn sites.
Yeah.
I think the top 2 are porn sites.
Yeah.
And even in virtual reality, the development, the game development there, what's the first things out of the gate? Porn.
Yeah. Sex dolls and all, yeah.
It just, and so I was gonna say is big data, what you were talking about with the Akashic Records, that's what it is. Right, and it's just, because, I mean, human, in this frequency of this vibration, we don't create anything new, we work backwards, right? By the box that we put in, and we learn from what has been set up for us.
Yeah.
Right, and how often Akashic Record, that's all, you know, what do you call it, mumbo jumbo, esoteric stuff. It's here, we're building it right now.
So day by day, this repository of this library, this records store, whatever you want to call it, is growing like exponentially. And because we're also in parallel building all of these other items like the AI, being able to harness massive power conduits and automating things, it's becoming more and more useful. We can read the data better. We can aggregate it so we can make conclusions and other sorts of decisions better. And by we, I don't mean humans. I mean AI, but decision makers still have that realm as well.
But all that external, what you see there, the external world, not the internal world, that external world makeup is the Orwellian control of the system, because you now have things like Mandela effect, which is about erasing data or manipulating historical data, like the one place in the States, well, a couple of them now, where they're digitizing all their books, right? You know, you've seen the Catholics or the religious institutions do this, winter of history, battles, write the history, write the notes, whatever. But they're doing this now when they update the digitized books, and they're updating, normalizing them to the context of the time, and then they destroy the books. So now you have no reference to go back to and see to the etymology or the root of
the original.
That's the danger, right? Because now no longer can we ever. That's why again we're in this Goldilocks moment where we need to stop that and bring everybody in and say, okay, here's the system, right, in play while it's still while we're still able to.
I even experienced that with like our library with KPL, because my mom, I get books for her. And when I'm trying to find books for her, 3/4 of the books, like the authors that she likes to read, it's all digital now.
All digital,
And I mean, she's not in her 80s, she wants a book.
Yeah. So I guess this is essentially, just to sum this up as quickly as I can, this think tank that we're kind of building here, we're trying to explore how we can get, I call it human 2.0. I mean, there's different ways you can describe what we're talking about, but these 6 items are going to change our lives, our world forever. And if not, have they, they, in a lot of ways, they already have. What we don't have is the capacity to live comfortably having these changes. Like, I can guarantee you, none of us can have a meaningful conversation about any of these items right now. Yet, they're coming, or they're here.
And you need to, you're going to be followed along just like we have been.
Yeah. So that's what we call it Tron, the reality of now. Why bother doing this? Because we're evolving whether we like it or not. I always used to do this when I was teaching teachers how to integrate technology in their classroom, right? There's so much apprehension. I've been doing this for 22 years and my kids sit on the floor and, why are you doing this to me? Why are you making my life so difficult? Because it's happening. with or without you. There are very good reasons why it's happening. I'm not saying, oh, hey, these 6 things are bad. I'm just saying they're realities. And they can be bad if we let them be bad. If we, now, and Ken has much better ways of saying this than I do, but to me, the idea is if we let things just go the way they are, watch your YouTube videos, go home and do your Netflix and hang out and go onto your Facebook or whatever you're using, and don't worry about this, don't worry about it. It'll take care of itself, it'll be fine. 10 years from now, I doubt it will be. It will definitely be something. But
we need to go back to dystopian novels
Yeah.
in time as a scientific experiment, make the predictions that are in Fahrenheit 451 or 1984, and say the future will be like this in 50 years. Time jump back to now, and we've just forecasted the future in a scientific method, because by experiment, we've ended up like this.
so what we're going to
now at a faster rate.
What we're going to do is we're going to take a holistic approach to asking the questions that are relevant to us evolving as a species, whatever that is. There are billions of questions that people have or problems that are going to arise along the way. We're going to take a holistic approach and merge it with the scientific method, which, not everybody necessarily has a great grasp of that. That's fine. But we do this for a very good reason, because if we don't root what we're doing in scientific method, it loses all validity. Whether it's true or not, it doesn't matter if we can't kind of prove it. And the things we're talking about, we can prove. Can we prove the existence of God? That's not what we're talking about. I mean, wow, that would be something. But
we can still stay on the road towards that. That's ever the journey.
Yeah, if one day there was a definitive answer to that, this sort of thing would help us get there. I guess that's what I believe.
In the scientific method, it's important for that to come into play, because the current dogma, the box that we're in, is the defining science. So you need to begin the attack from using that current controlling mechanism, or they're a bunch of wingbat, esoteric, whatever, space people, right? Which is all these different UFO communities that come in from that angle, as opposed to, okay, let's do this in a very scientific fashion, and that way you'll have more buy-in.
So here's how it works. We take this approach, and by holistic, I mean we're trying to not exclude anything. Right? And so this is what you find often in research studies. They're very focused in whether they're biased is another issue altogether, but they're definitely very focused in and centralized on a single, exactly. And what we're able to do nowadays with the technology we have and with this big data, we can do what's called like aggregation. So we can take all of these things and like put them all together in more of a holistic approach. So basically what we do is we ask a question, so we call it the problem set. And one question could be, are we going to become spacefaring, or can we become spacefaring in the next 5 years? Oh, that's a question. Is it possible to a scientific one that people are wrestling with these days. Can DNA have memory? Can it store memory? Not just its encoding, but can it actually, epigenetics and all that sort of thing? Solid questions. I mean, it goes on and on and on. We get into consciousness. We get into, the idea is, we're basing a lot of this on some hypotheses. Yep. And some of these hypotheses are this idea that we don't necessarily need to externalize ourselves to evolve. In fact, in some ways, this is actually trapping us into something like,
which is what they want.
So, it's our belief. And again, we're not just going to just say, I believe that, we can power ourselves from the inside out and just everybody believe that because it's got to be true because I believe it, because it's got to be true because I believe it. No, we're not doing that. We're actually going to take it through this approach We're going to ask the question. We're going to generate some content, and this is where things get really cool, because the internet is already out there. All the content is already out there. What we have to do, and by we I mean anybody who's interested in taking a chunk of this and, we call it like cleaning the data, right? Trying to find the truth of things, having a nice learning pathway or a string of content pieces to go from beginning to end, and start generating that content.
From a level of open-minded individuals, from individuals like us that are already
Yeah.
at this higher
Yeah.
frequency of spectrum that
Yeah.
see it all, are willing to accept
Yeah.
it all, no matter what entry
Yeah.
point, and are willing to look at all these
Yeah.
different angles and manipulate it into a new narrative.
Yeah,
To say, let's look at the storyline
Yeah.
from this, all the while going towards,
yeah.
the singularity of intent of these hypotheses that
Yeah.
we have proposed.
So we're generating content for the purposes of a re-education program. And what we're trying to build, are, I guess, new teachers, new types of teachers. Teachers, like you said, who are open-minded, who have certain skill sets that they're able to go into this rather muddled world that we live in and have an idea in mind of what question they're trying to answer, and be able to navigate through all of the weirdness that's there and come out with a good nugget of information, as truthfully as we can. So what we'd like to do is train, because I think there's some key fundamental skills that will help you in kind of doing this, like a nice tool set. We call them heroes of humanity. To become a hero of humanity, basically, you need to have the skills of a visionary. You need to have the skills of a starseed, of a maverick, of an architect, and a debugger. If we look at those as maybe like archetypes, right? The 5 archetypes. If you can be balanced with those 5 archetypes in terms of your skill set, you can navigate these things and, basically creating learning content for others is basically what we're getting at. So we're trying to find people who, like I said, have an interest in, this sort of thing, are willing to kind of learn what it would take, the skills in terms of skill development to become one of these master teachers, because it's not specific to content necessarily, although each of you, I'm sure, has your own content that you would love to focus on. It's really like a generic skill set. And then we create the content and we plug it into this cool daddy, which we call, and this really blows people's minds, reality engine generation. By doing what I just described, we can actually create new realities. Whatever that is, I don't know. I have no idea. That's what the future is. But
The hypothesis.
so we can either do it like this by just closing our eyes and allowing these to take hold and do their thing, and the big business to do their thing, and governments to do their thing, and all of that stuff. And we're going to definitely come to a new reality in 5 to 10 years. Is it of our making? Do we have any choice in the matter? That sort of thing? Well, that remains to be seen. But what we're suggesting is that if we start piece by piece creating content that is real, solid, useful, relevant, helpful, in terms of helping people to become able to handle whatever the future looks like, which is upon us, then we, in effect, can create our own realities.
So you've heard you hear it all the time in the esoteric or new age sectors, laws of attraction. Focus on what you really want and it'll come true. Just think of love, just that it's too arbitrary. And there's no process. There is a process and a hierarchy to everything in the laws of nature and the laws of the cosmos. A lot of people like to say that I don't want to be in a hierarchy. You're always in a hierarchy. It's like a child going into a higher frequency, or just from the house, and as a teenager go, I don't want to listen to you anymore, and then they go through this adventuring path, and then eventually they realize, okay, yeah, there still has to be some order at some level. And so what we've done now is put this architecture, this process for everything to follow through, and one that steals the narrative from the current players in the game, with proposing their own hypotheses at their level, right? And just by the sheer proposing those hypotheses, we're coming out and saying, prove us wrong. Because in proving us wrong, you have to go through the data and link together, like all our educators have been doing, who are extremely open-minded from all angles, who are PhDs in their own rights, who are specialists, da-da-da-da. The only difference between us and that other system is we're working together around this round table to stop all this crap, this war, poverty, da-da-da-da, right? And
So, yeah, solving the real world problems,
that's right.
but not using their narrative, using one that we're making. Because, you know, that's a thing that I often find. I mean, people will anonymously through text or through social media talk about how empowered they are. But when it really comes down to it, they don't have the skills. Even though they might have the drive and desire, they don't have it because it's been pushed out of them, right? We talked about the formal school system earlier. Like, that's proof, and like that's exactly where it comes from. You know, and they've been doing it for hundreds of years.
You
So,
have discernment.
No,
That's the big thing.
That's
All
right,
this
because
false
critical thinking has
information, you
been-
have to separate the wheat from the chaff,
Check.
and you gotta have those skill sets to know that that's bullshit and that's not.
But if, as a child, you growing up, I'd beaten the critical thinking out of you. Well, you don't even know, you barely know what does mean, never mind discernment.
That's why you need mavericks.
Exactly, right? And when you look into the history of evolution, just biological evolution, this is where mavericks come out at the edge of this timeline where the convergence of the old system and the new system begin. This is where you get labels, ADHD, autism spectrum, bipolar. This is where all these different individuals that do not fit in that system come out. And this is where we're gonna light them up. So that all these new narratives, everyone fighting as a, you know, with mental disabilities, look at us, because you're needed, right? All your huge open-minded thinking is needed now.
and so what we're doing here, and essentially, so this, we're not going to get into this, but this thing is actually technology. So we're going to demo a little bit of what it looks like kind of to the user, for the user experience today, as a prototype. But this actually, technology, we're just going to use the power of technology to generate something just like is going on here. And because again, big data isn't a bad thing in and of itself. It's just data. It's what you do with it, that, you know. And so anyway, we were not going to get into the technicalities, but really what we're doing is we're taking this, and imagine this as the new content, the clean room content, the content that we've driven toward the reality that we're looking for, and we send it out in different delivery mechanisms, like, you know, TV and web, like Aubrey's got his web series, his YouTube series, things like that. Kelly, I know you do a lot of workshops yourself with like things like this, where you can start to take this stuff. We have this idea of a space academy for kids. We were talking to you about Tammy, our friend Tammy, who has this self-actualization program for kids. I mean, that's the start of something like this, because it's not about, oh, hey, let's learn how to be rocketeers. It's let's learn how to live in a reality where, wow, I'm in space. I'm locked on a ship, or maybe I'm on a planet as I've colonized a planet, or, you know, there's all sorts of behaviors and all sorts of factors and ethics and things like that that don't necessarily get taken into account beyond just the technicalities. So it's more than just that. It's about, you know, being able to be that I guess, evolved human that can handle that stuff, whatever that looks like. I have no idea. And there's gaming. This is called alternative or augmented reality gaming, workshops and conferences and other stuff, whatever we can come up with. Basically, it's a new repository, or a new, I don't want to call it an Akashic Records, but I mean, this is the sort of thing we're doing, is if people start to,
analogy,
yeah.
And because what's important is we talk about, just like biology, like Claire Patterson is an example of an individual when figuring out lead. Corporations knew long before that lead causes a lot of mental problems.
Oh, yeah.
Never mind in Rome. But it's easy to mine, and it's easy to manipulate and then sell to the mass public. They kept this hidden. Claire Patterson saw that it was this, and but he couldn't solve the problems it was causing, but he couldn't nail down the exact problem until he created, and this is where the clean room analogy came from. You see this in biology and other things that are related, where it's just a surgery, right? That's a clean room, where there's no disease or anything. We're using the exact same stuff. What the system is using against us, we're using against it, right? And so this clean room analogy is you have all this dirty data out there. What we're going to be housing is the clean room, and we're cleaning it all towards this singularity of intent, right? Which is helping define our beacon of what we want the data in this new world, this new reality to look like, or ultimately look like. So that's what the reality engine generation is, but there's this whole wide, and if you think of it in a 2D sense, this wide spectrum, hang on, I'll turn that around for others, where there's all these entry points. So one of the things, the way Peter likes to describe it is, especially in the education field, you have to meet people where they're at, right? So we can't go in and start talking about being starseeds to somebody that is just
An office worker who's never done anything in space other than watch Star Trek Next Generation or something like that, where they're coming in totally cold off the streets. What do? Right? What's that level 0 look like to that person with that content?